All right, so welcome to our show and tell for our first sprint. We actually had a sprint 0 previously, which was more around our kicking off the project and some work that we'd been doing to get set up. And we've sort of got a lot of the team together now. And so this is our kind of first sprint of some work that we've been going through on the project. Quick overview of the project. It's been awarded funding from the COVID-19 challenge as part of the local digital fund. So it's funded by MHCLG. And there's two key outputs of the project. We're looking at digital place-based engagement playbook and also a digital planning notice. The big issues around this are the response to COVID meant that our engagement in planning obviously pretty much went fully digital because we had to have lockdown and there were no face-to-face events or meetings anymore. So we were rapidly adapting to try and find ways to respond to that and see what we could do around digital engagement. And we weren't really writing any of it down. We were learning from other authorities were learning from us, but I think by writing it down, we realized we could actually try and help the kind of that wider local government community to try and help adapt and be a bit more resilient to these kind of events in the future. It also obviously highlighted some opportunities to improve engagement in general. Engagement has always been a bit of a struggle with planning in terms of various barriers at different stages, different groups being excluded and so on. So there's a lot of opportunity to try and help address that as part of this project too. And the one thing that came out of it, which sort of got left behind the digitisation, was the planning notice. These site notices that go up telling you around, particularly in terms of planning applications, although they're used at various points throughout the process. And so that's the kind of thing that we wanted to look at next, was how do we make those more accessible, more visual, but crucially, how can we make a sort of a digital twin of them, where rather than just taking you to a list of applications with PDFs documents all sitting on a website, it actually gives you some more valuable information, but also use it as a door into wider engagement and lots of different place-based platforms which the council might be advising on. So firstly, the work on the digital site notice. We're doing procurement at the moment, which will find a delivery partner to help us produce that. We are going through the process at the moment. We've got a few delays, but I think it's thrown up a few points to note where there are significant challenges in local GovTech procurement, particularly when you're trying to be very rapid and responding quickly to things like pandemics. And it also showed a kind of a lack of knowledge really within our team. I had to do a huge amount of learning, very steep learning curve for me. And I think it was that trying to find a way in the future to see how we can adapt to that and do it a lot quicker. And we know that there are other projects ongoing. Lottie are looking at it, and some other people around Gov procurement in that area. So hopefully 4 weeks time, we should have a delivery partner working on that with us. The next bit of work we did was looking around legal requirements for the planning notice. This sort of expanded a little bit to look not just at the planning notice, but also the general requirements, because obviously this is going to help inform the playbook as well. Part of it is to try and understand what legal requirements are met by different platforms and tools. But in terms of the planning notice, the reason people still use planning notices and the reason they're quite important is because firstly, they're an on-the-ground communication device. Not everything has to be digital, but they're also a legal requirement. Obviously, we kind of focused on initially Article 15 of the Development Management Procedure Order, which is the one around planning applications. But kind of as we looked into it, there are a lot more regulations, and there are different types of requirements for different types of notice. So that will be an important part of the work, trying to work out, can we meet all of those requirements, or do we have to create a product, a minimum viable product that maybe just leaves some of them out? So that will be a bit of work that we will continue to progress. And that's the top layer, if you like, the minimum legal requirements. But then there's also a requirement for us to have statements of community involvement. and those impose like an additional secondary local requirement layer. A lot of local authorities seem to mirror the requirements in terms of planning notices, but they're not all completely mirrored, and there are different triggers and different requirements for using a planning notice. So we just need to try and be aware of that. So we will be doing more work on looking at a bigger sample of statement of community involvement documents that have been published by local authorities, and try and understand a bit better what the divergence is and how we can deal with that, or if there are any significant issues really to deal with. It may be that they're not significant and they're easily overcome. So in terms of the digital engagement playbook, like I said, that work around the SCIs, the statement of community involvements, that kind of played into this. But another big area we were doing was continuing to build on our initial work on pulling together all of our existing tools and processes. This was part of the kind of Sprint Zero. And so what we did is we had a workshop to look at these and try and understand what the impact of each of these was within the planning process. So we looked at where tools and platforms come within the planning process, and obviously there's a number of key points where there is public engagement, and the level of public engagement varies significantly, but different tools can be used at different points. But similarly, we use the same tools across different areas in the process. So we wanted to try and understand where in the process, and we use these kind of color coding sticky notes to try and work out if there was a pattern emerging from that. The way we mapped that and understood their impact was by looking at this kind of this matrix of participation. This one's published by the International Association for Public Participation, but there are many others that are very similar to this. And the key thing with this is around understanding what level of involvement, all the way up to kind of collaboration and empowerment here, what level of impact does it have? But the useful thing in this matrix as well is not just the horizontal, it's understanding the differences between the public participation goal and the promise to the public. Now, in our view, the way we viewed this more was as the goal is more around the reality of the situation. That's how it works on the ground. And then the promise to the public being the expectation of the public, really, or indeed of us, and trying to see if there is a discrepancy between the two of these. So we went and we had a look at these, and you can see we use a tool Miro to do sort of live brainstorming around this, and we put these sticky notes on, and we put the same objectives across and tools across the top and the bottom row to see where there were discrepancies, but also by using these color coding we could see where different points of engagement fell on the spectrum left to right as well. So you can see that there's none of the pink, for example, which is the planning application stage, none of it goes up into the top end collaboration or empowerment, either for how it works on the ground or what our promise is. But then I think there were other key issues around, like, for example, policies really kind of spread out. So this is the plan making stage, the orange ones, and you can see that it's really spread out across the left to right. So it means there's big gaps in there, and there's real opportunity to try and drag more up to this end of the scale. And we found some that were consistent in terms of their actual and expected impacts, but others had really big differences. And so this kind of just is to highlight too. So you've got local plan sits up here. Here's the, kind of what we're looking at is kind of consultation and so on. But in reality, we're sort of promising more collaboration on that, and that's probably not really being delivered through the current processes that we're using, how we deliver that, those kind of general consultation practices. Press notices, similarly, I think we had a look at those where they're in the consult, but we think that's probably what the public generally sees them as. They see them as consultation devices where they can just give their comments that we can take on board. So there's there's a few issues here that have been highlighted by these kind of sideways arrows, finding out, okay, we need to do some work to try and make sure that we match the reality to the expectation. And then we also did a little bit of looking at other tools and platforms. So we've started to look at some other LPAs or other organizations and what they do. Some people helpfully on Twitter have like pointed me to other platforms and stuff to have a look at, the ones that we don't use. And although there's a lot of crossover and similarities, it's really useful to have that sort of exposure to these other tools and platforms that can really help with public participation. And we also looked at other organisations outside of councils as well. So PINs are running virtual planning inquiries. And so we dropped into a virtual planning inquiry to see how that was delivered. It was done through Teams, but they was structured in a certain way. And I think the way in which, although it was a very formal procedure, a public inquiry, for anyone who's ever been part of one prior to COVID, you'll know it's very sort of formal, very structured. And whilst that was managed well in a formal, structured way, there was something actually about it that made it feel a little bit less formal in that environment, which is probably a good thing in a lot of ways. I think it maybe makes it a bit more accessible for people. So it was quite interesting to see that. And then the other thing we looked at in terms of the playbook was we started to have a little think about what is our output going to be. And so in terms of, we've got all these different tools and platforms, and if we think about these attributes and tags, and this really came from looking at the Hyper Island toolbox, which we mentioned in the previous sprint work, you can filter down and try and understand what the benefits of each system are, and it allows people to try and find the right solution for them a lot easier if we kind of put those tags and attributes on everything. That then allows us to work out how we structure it. So what will users look for? So that's going to be down to a bit of user research there, is to try and understand what do users want to use, what criteria do they want to use to select and understand what tools and platforms are available to them to improve public participation. And then thinking about having that structured data obviously is open data, but then do we need a GUI? Do we need a front end of it? Possibly not as part of this project. It may be that our minimum viable product is more around the structured data and keeping it open so others can develop it, but it may be that we develop it, and we'll see. That's sort of up in the air at the moment. And what we're going to do is try and have a discussion around this in terms of outputs. What do we want it to look like? How do we want to deliver it, with a couple of other projects? So Eglay from Local Digital Collaboration Unit is working with us and has set up meetings for the next sprint, where we're going to join up with a couple of other playbook projects that are also funded from this COVID-19 response challenge. So we're going to have a chat with them and try and see if there's any sort of crossover, and we see if we can align the projects in any way and kind of agree on a format or process for delivering them, or even if we need to. So the next section is about project comms. We've been working hard on these. I'll just hand over now to Jono, who's been working on trying to get this up to speed.
Thank you, Rich. So we're obviously coming up with some great ideas here, and you can probably move to the next slide for me. So with the digital engagement project, we're trying to consult and empower more, but we also need to work more collaboratively with other people. There's other good projects going around. For example, Camden has always traditionally had development management forums, which are kind of big pre-app meetings that the developer comes along to and presents a scheme, and then it's a Q&A style, and the council chairs it. So recently we've taken that to a remote platform. And so we're posting that through our YouTube channel, and it's also going on live through a dedicated streamed website. So other boroughs are starting to reach out, such as Kensington and Chelsea and Haringey. So I think it's about trying to collaborate more. And so we've set up a YouTube channel, and the links are all on the left-hand side of your screen. The YouTube channel, we can put our sprint meetings on, like this one. We can also start bringing in our DM forums, even planning committees, and even start, sharing all sorts of content on there. We've also set up a Twitter page, and at the moment the group's called Town Planning Digital Community. That might not be what we settle on. It's still a work in progress, as is the logo you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. But the principle is it's about making engagement inclusive, and obviously it's about innovation and empowerment of the digital process. So through the Twitter platform, already starting to make lots of connections with. There's so many people in the industry. There's so many people doing good things out there. I've already been blown away by all the different connections I've already found out there. The next platform we've sought to achieve is Medium, and that's one that we can start putting blog posts on, so we can do summaries of these sprint meetings. We can also post articles about what's happening in the industry, and it's a great way again of sharing ideas and connecting. And finally, we've got a LinkedIn group as well, and so LinkedIn group is a good opportunity to meet people from all over the world. So already someone from a local government project in the States has kind of reached out to me and said, we're interested in what you're doing. And in America right now, they're setting up a Wikipedia for local government and digital engagement. So it'll be interesting to idea share, not just with people from around the country, but also around the world. And finally, MHCLG are making a kind of dedicated website for us, and Camden and others can be responsible for editing the content on there. And if you can flick just to the next slide, please, Rich. So this is a few of the things. So the bottom left corner is the kind of title page of the Medium content, and then I've got two screenshots from LinkedIn. So the bottom right is my profile, and I've added the kind of various channels to that, just so I can start making connections. And the top left is the group I've set up, which for the moment it's still being built, and so I'm keen to work with whoever I can really to get more content and to start posting and make connections. And then I've got a question mark next to Facebook and Instagram. Do we want to spread ourselves that thin? I'm not sure yet, but I think from experience so far, I think it's great that we can post videos and content on YouTube, and I think Twitter is just a great place to meet people and have connections. So that's all for now. We are at the infancy stage of this. We've just kind of created these comms networks. We want to reach out, so please subscribe and join us and post. And yeah, we look forward to collaborating with everyone out there and sharing ideas. So thanks, Rich. That's all for now.
Cool. Cheers, mate. And we're now on to metrics. So this was one of the things that we started to think around was firstly understanding where we are, and also where we sort of want to get to, and how do we measure that impact. So thought obviously big part of that is trying to understand the impact that the project has by simply benchmarking, by looking at kind of where we stand now, so we can understand what that kind of success looks like, because we effectively want greater numbers of participation, and we want more balanced participation, and we want more sort of inclusive participation. So how do we measure that? Well, we can start to look at participation numbers and what kind of balance we have. Those are the obvious areas that we're going to look at. And so as part of that, we've been looking at where we are now, which also gives us just some insight in terms of where we need to improve as well. It helps to sort of guide the project as well as measure the impact at the end of the project. So for planning applications, we started looking at numbers of objections and supports for comments, and having a look at how that's gone, and I'll show you something briefly shortly on that. We've also been looking at attendance for DM forums, and I think the impact there, like Jono was saying, those are events which used to be face-to-face. We would have them with the community and we'd get attendance there. So we're going to be going back and looking at what that attendance was. Since COVID, we've got attendance records for our digital platforms that we've been using for those DM forums. So we're going to look at that. And then it allows us to see if any work we can do as part of this project improves that even further. And the good thing about the digital platforms is we start to get a little bit more insight, and I think that comes onto the policy point, which is around the consultation data we're getting in through the policy stuff, which is more around platforms like Commonplace, and there are other ones which I'm aware of which we're going to start looking at too. You can get, and this is the advantage of digital, I guess, digital platforms, is that you might have to deal with digital divide and accessibility of certain groups, but you get quite a clear picture of those groups and of demographics of people who are involved in that. Plus you also get kind of information around who's engaging but not leaving comments, and that's one of the big things, is obviously you get sort of more balanced comments from that. You can start to see actually there's a load of people who didn't comment, who didn't put in objections, but they were sat there and they meaningfully engaged with that material, whereas it's much harder to measure that in response to things like general planning consultations for a planning application. So we don't tend to ask people that as part of the invitation to respond. So we don't know who looked at it and didn't have such a problem with it that they decided to respond. And then, like I said, we're looking at formal non-digital methods. So that's around things like DM forums, but also other events. So we're going to try and see what we can do to try and get that historic data so we can have a look at it and compare it. And this just shows you that sort of pattern that I was saying around. So you can see that there's kind of 700 apps since start of lockdown. There's a general pattern downwards, although we've had a downward trend in some applications as well, so it's not as steep as we thought it would be. But the thing to note with this is that that orange line, which is the objections, is pretty close to the total comments received, which is the blue line. So you can see that for many, the issue is really to it is only something worth raising if they're objecting to it. Now that may reflect that everything that comes in is objectionable, but that seems unlikely given that our approval rate is fairly high and we don't have people complaining about the approval rate. So it seems more that people would be more willing to kind of object to something, which is fair, really. That's kind of logical and it makes sense. But I guess it's how do we get a picture of that as an authority? How do we understand what that sort of more balanced view is on it? And you can see here that the spikes are relating to major applications. So people tend to comment on things that are bigger in scale and have bigger impacts rather than on smaller things, which again makes perfect sense. So that's the end of it. I think we didn't have any questions at the end of this. So what I would say though is I'd encourage people. At the moment, we're not broadcasting these live; we're recording them. So the questions really come through the people in the room at the moment. We will look at see if we can hold live events through Teams for this to see if we can get live questions. But in the meantime, we will be posting these all up on YouTube. You'll find this one on YouTube, but what I'd encourage you to do is contact us in one of the ways that Jono's already mentioned. Look through Twitter or something like that. And if you've got any questions for our next show and tell, send us the questions through any format, email, Twitter, anything like that. Send us the questions and then we'll do our best to try and answer those at the next show and tell as well. All right, thanks a lot, and we'll see you at the next show and tell.
Thanks so much. Cheers, everyone.